The evening city was alive with its own rhythm, busy streets, shop windows glowing, and street musicians playing their melodies. I walked along the sidewalk, fully dressed in the formal uniform of a U.S. Navy Admiral. The medals on my chest made soft jingling sounds with every step I took. Pride filled me each time I donned this uniform, feeling like a living symbol of the ideals I had dedicated my life to: honor, duty, and justice. But at that moment, a strange sense of unease lingered in the air. Perhaps it was my years of service, which had trained me to sense the faintest hint of danger. I continued walking, head held high, but an inner voice whispered that this day would not unfold as planned. There was a weight on my shoulders, not just from the medals, but from the entire history I carried with me. That history was now telling me that justice, to which I had dedicated my life, could sometimes be an illusion. This city had long been a testament to how far prejudice and fear of the unknown could extend. Yet today, I was not ready to be part of that legacy. I walked confidently down the street, knowing my rank should command respect. I felt strong, yet I also knew that around every corner lurked those who might see me only as a man of a different skin color, not a Navy Admiral. A patrol car flashed past, slowed down, and came to a stop. Immediately, I felt a cold gaze on me. The officer stepping out of the car seemed to be watching my back. I hadn't seen his face yet, but I knew his steps were aimed at me. A thought crossed my mind. Could it be happening again? But I pushed it aside, refusing to jump to conclusions. The officer's footsteps grew closer. I prepared myself for the encounter, confident that my status and calm demeanor would defuse the situation. But I was wrong. Documents, the officer barked. It was a short, harsh order. He stood in front of me, tall with stern features. His gaze felt cold, almost as if he had already made up his mind. I glanced at his badge. Officer Samuel Holt. His look didn't change, even in the face of my uniform and age. To him, I was a threat. "Good evening, officer. What's the problem?" I asked calmly, trying to initiate a civil conversation. His expression didn't budge. He demanded my documents as if he was certain there was something suspicious. I handed over my Navy ID and other papers, hiding my frustration. Inside, however, indignation began to bubble. Who was he to treat me like this? I kept my composure, recalling the years of service that had taught me patience and restraint. Holt skimmed through my documents briefly and then, without looking up, muttered, "You're being detained for questioning." His words hit like a punch. Around us, a crowd began to gather, people taking out their phones. It was turning into a public scene. I could have argued, demanded answers, but I knew it would only escalate the situation. "This is a mistake, officer," I said, keeping my voice steady. But Holt had already stepped closer, twisting my arms behind my back and clamping on handcuffs. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just about enforcing authority. It was about humiliation. My uniform, my years of service, all of it seemed powerless against his prejudice. As he shoved me into the car, a surge of determination sparked within me. He could handcuff me, but he couldn't silence my voice. At the station, I was led into a holding room and sat on a cold bench. Time seemed to stop. The silence made the hum of thoughts in my head louder. How had it come to this? Me, an admiral, now seen as a criminal in front of the entire city. Outrage boiled within me, but I knew better than to lash out in anger. That's what they wanted, to provoke me into losing control. Several hours passed before the door opened. I looked up to see Marcus Reed, my old ally, walking in. His mere presence exuded confidence. Reed was a man of few words, but his arrival meant things were about to be set right. He approached Holt and, with a sharp, icy tone, commanded, "Release Admiral Jackson." Now, I saw Holt's face pale as he fumbled to remove the cuffs. Marcus extended his hand, helping me up. Despite the burning humiliation, I nodded to him, remaining silent as we headed out the door. As we stepped into the street, I whispered to Marcus, "This won't go unnoticed." He met my gaze with a look of firm resolve, and I knew this was just the start of a much larger fight. I sat at the edge of the bed in my hotel room, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were heavy, thoughts swarming in my head, and the bitter taste of injustice still lingered in my mouth. Yesterday's events, Officer Holt's cold and contemptuous stare, his sense of unchecked power, it all replayed in my mind. That memory stoked a fire inside me, blending with the growing determination. Today, things needed to change. A noise outside caught my attention. I walked to the window and saw a group of journalists gathering. The news of my arrest had evidently spread. People were demanding answers. And this was my strength. I wasn't alone. I wasn't just a man in a uniform. I was Admiral Jackson, a citizen, the embodiment of ideals that should be protected. I realized in that moment I had a responsibility not just to speak for myself, but for everyone who faced similar injustices. Taking a deep breath, I started formulating a plan. I needed an ally, someone who understood the gravity of the situation. There was only one person I could trust, Marcus Reed. Marcus was a man of integrity, just like me. He understood what was at stake. I decided to reach out to him, not as an old friend, but as a representative of the system, someone with the power to enact real change from within. Either the system would change, or it would lose the trust of the people. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered almost immediately, his voice quiet but tense. "Marcus, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We agreed to meet at his office in the station. I hung up and closed my eyes, gathering my thoughts. Today marked the beginning of a new phase in my struggle, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The walk to the police station felt like it stretched on forever. The long corridors, muffled voices, and stark white walls created an oppressive silence. Every step echoed like a heartbeat in my head. I knew I wasn't just walking towards Marcus. I was walking towards the system we needed to change. When I reached his office, the door was slightly ajar. Without knocking, I entered. Marcus sat at his desk, flipping through some documents. When he saw me, he looked up, his face tense but filled with purpose. "Sit down, Jackson," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. I sat down, meeting his eyes. "We both know why I'm here," I said, the anger I had been holding back now bubbling to the surface. Marcus nodded, his face grim. "Holt's actions were unacceptable, but it's not just him. This is a systemic problem, Marcus, and we need to address it." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair, clasping his hands together. "You want to challenge the system," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes locked on mine. I didn't break the stare. I already have. The moment Holt handcuffed me, I challenged it. We weren't just having a conversation as friends now. This was a strategic discussion, one aimed at shaking the very foundations of policing in this city, and possibly beyond. "I want an internal investigation into Holt's conduct," I said firmly. "And while we're at it, we need to develop a training program to root out this kind of prejudice. We can't let this happen again." Marcus listened, his expression serious. Then he slowly nodded. "I'll submit a request for an investigation," he said. "But you know, this is just the beginning." I knew we were about to embark on a long, difficult journey. But at that moment, I felt a weight lift. We were no longer helpless. Now we were acting. Together, we were going to confront the system that had seemed untouchable. Days passed, and the incident became the talk of the city. People were discussing it everywhere. We prepared a statement for the city administration and scheduled a press conference at City Hall. I stood backstage, going over my words. Once again, I was in full dress uniform, wearing it proudly to show that I wasn't just speaking as an individual, but as someone who had served this country honorably. My words needed to carry weight and demand respect. When the moment came, I stepped up to the microphone. The bright lights hit my eyes, but I stood firm. Before me were journalists, and behind them, members of the public who had gathered to hear the truth. "This incident isn't an isolated case," I began, my voice loud and clear. The tension in the room was palpable. "It's a call for systemic change, a fight against the prejudices that tear apart the unity we should strive for." I spoke about the bias I had faced, not just disrespect, but a deep-rooted prejudice that affects many. I spoke for those who experience this daily, but don't have the rank or status to fight back. The room was silent as I spoke, everyone hanging on my words. I could feel the wave of emotion spreading through the audience. Carter stood to the side, observing everything. I knew we had a long fight ahead of us, but in that moment, I felt stronger than ever. We had stirred a wave of change, and now that wave had to sweep through everything. I ended my speech with, "We must change the system so that it serves every citizen, no matter their skin color or rank." The room erupted into applause, and I knew we were on the right path. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The night before the trial was filled with anxiety, wrapping itself around every corner of my mind. Questions circled endlessly, giving me no peace. Would we be able to achieve justice? What would happen next? It seemed that I had seen countless injustices throughout my life, but this time felt different. At stake was not just my personal honor and dignity, but the example this case would set for the entire community. I had to stay strong. I got up from the bed and walked to the window. The sounds of the city night drifted up from the street, and I saw a group of people gathered at the entrance of the hotel. They were waiting for a decision that could change their entire understanding of justice. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the fight of all those who had been treated unjustly and faced prejudice. I closed my eyes and went over everything that would happen the next day. The courtroom would be an arena where two worlds would collide. The world that defends prejudice and the world that demands change. Holt's lawyers would argue that his actions were based on professional intuition, the right of a police officer to make split-second decisions. My job was to prove that this so-called intuition was rooted in a deep bias that had infected the entire system. Anger and determination swelled in my chest. I had to speak the truth, to expose what had been hidden behind words like honor and the right to protect. In my hands lay the chance to challenge the entire system. I sat down at the desk and began writing key points for my testimony. The words had to be powerful, honest, and direct. They needed to show that this was not just the fault of one individual, but a reflection of a disease that had been growing inside the system for far too long. The courtroom was packed the next day. The crowd sat in tense anticipation. Cameras focused on the center of the room, where the judge would soon deliver a verdict. I sat in the front row, feeling each beat of my heart like a drum. Next to me was Marcus Reed, his gaze intense, his face impassive. We exchanged a glance. We both knew this was more than just a legal proceeding. It was the beginning of a battle that could impact countless lives. The session began with Holt's testimony. His lawyer made excuses, claiming that Holt's actions were the result of professional intuition. He talked about how police officers face risks and need to make quick decisions. But with every word he spoke, I became more convinced. This wasn't about professionalism. It was about bias masked behind those words. Then it was my turn. As I stood, I felt the piercing gazes of dozens of eyes upon me, the glare of cameras unrelenting. I walked to the stand, my heart pounding, but my voice stayed firm. "This incident is not just a random mistake," I began, knowing that all attention was now locked on me. "It's a manifestation of a systemic problem that must be acknowledged and eradicated." I looked directly at the judge, feeling the weight of every word. I spoke of how my rank and achievements had been disregarded due to Holt's prejudice. I spoke of how similar things happen to people every day. People who don't have the rank or the means to fight back. The room was silent, as if everyone had stopped breathing. Every word I spoke felt like it was piercing the indifference that allowed this system to continue unchecked. The session dragged on for hours, the tension building. Outside the courthouse, the public's demand for justice only grew louder. People gathered with signs, shouting for change. This was no longer just about me. It had become a symbol, a fight that touched the entire city. After the session ended, Marcus and I walked out to face the crowd. The noise quieted as we stepped through the courthouse doors. There was a heaviness in the air, a thick tension that filled the space. I took a few steps forward and stopped, looking at the people gathered. In their eyes, I saw hope and expectation. A wave of emotion swept over me as I realized just how much was riding on this case. This wasn't just about me or even about Holt. It was about a community demanding to be seen, to be heard, and to be treated fairly. The crowd greeted us with applause and chants of justice. The word echoed in my heart, growing louder with every cheer. I took the microphone handed to me and raised it to my lips. "We will achieve change," I said, looking into the eyes of the people. And it will be our shared victory. At that moment, I knew the fight had only just begun, but I could also feel the momentum. The wave of change was gaining strength, and it wasn't going to stop. This was no longer just about winning in court. It was a call to arms for those ready to fight for equality and justice. We were standing at the edge of a new era, and I knew I wasn't alone in this battle. We stood on the brink of a new era, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone in this struggle. The applause faded, but the determination in the crowd remained. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was our fight, a battle for justice, for equality, and for a future where no one is judged by their appearance, but by their character. As I walked away from the courthouse, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. This wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. Sometimes, the greatest battles we face aren't fought on a battlefield. They're fought within the systems that are meant to protect us. It takes courage to stand up to injustice, but it takes even more to inspire change in others. No matter how daunting the fight, remember, one voice united with others can create a wave that reshapes the world. This story is a reminder that justice is not always guaranteed. It's something we must strive for every day. If you've ever faced injustice or seen someone treated unfairly, speak up. Be the change. Let's work together to create a society where equality isn't just an ideal, but a reality for everyone.